Hello, my name is Dee Ann McIntyre. We are here at the Vladem Contemporary Art Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am the curator of the art exhibit Finding Parkinson's, Doing Battle with My Brain by the artist David Thomas. The show opened at the Vladem Contemporary Art Museum September 5th and will close September 14th, 2025. The Vladem Contemporary Art Museum is very happy to show David's 24 lithographs in which he superimposed his face on MRI scans of his brain and then collaged these into his earlier lithographs. The images explore the psychological aftermath of David's diagnosis of Parkinson's in 2015, most likely due to his exposure to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. A major point of the show and of the two panel discussions, September 6th and 13th, is the finding that if a person with Parkinson's works at any art form, such as music, painting, dance, or writing, plus vigorous movement, that it slows the progress of Parkinson's. Art and movement have a profound effect on the neurology of the brain.
When I was diagnosed in 2015, I was of course shocked. But when I got over the shock, I wanted to think about how this would affect my art, because there were so many symptoms of Parkinson's disease, the common one being the tremor, which I haven't developed yet, but probably will. And if I have a tremor, how is that going to affect the way I can draw, use a computer, everything? So I started thinking about how my art could adapt to the Parkinson's. A lot of Parkinson's artists that I know do that, and they just let it help them. It becomes a tool rather than a problem. But you have to be creative in thinking about what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it. So I decided, sort of almost by chance, that I would take some MRIs that my neurologist had ordered of my brain and use those somehow. They were graphically very strong, and I'm a printmaker, so I respond to the graphic quality of images. I would use those, and then I was sitting in my studio and I took a camera and made on my iPhone and made some selfies, sideways, above, below, and some screaming, which I sometimes feel like doing, and some smiling, which I often feel like doing, different expressions. Thinking about the brain all the time I'm doing this, and it's that brain that's been damaged by the lack of dopamine, which causes the Parkinson's, and how it's going to impact the visual quality and the message of my work. So I took the selfies and I took the MRI scan of my brain and I began to layer them in Photoshop, and I played with them and using some filters and using some tools, because Photoshop has thousands of tools you can use. It becomes a problem with students. They tend to use all the tools, but they have nothing to say with them. They just like the texture. But I started to do that, and I did a series of probably 20 prints that are smaller than the later ones, and they're black and white, because the selfies I didn't want them to be in color. I didn't want them to be so recognizable as my face, and it blended better with the scan images because they were black and white. And the colored selfies would have been conflicting with the black and white selfies. and they began to look interesting. So I said, "Oh, this is worth pursuing," and I probably did 100. Many of them I don't exhibit because I don't think they don't say what I want them to say. Maybe my Parkinson's was hindering my dialogue, or maybe just my own skills as an artist. But either way, I decided, at the same time I was cleaning out my print drawers. As a 79-year-old artist, I owe it to my grandchildren to make sense out of my portfolio of hundreds, maybe thousands of prints that I've done over the last 50 years, 60 years. So I had a bunch of old prints on the table that I work on, and I just thought I'd try dropping one of these selfie brain scan images on top of the old prints. And it was particularly a series of prints I did in the 1980s that were not my best work, but they didn't have a message. I didn't have something I was passionate about. So I explored, like a lot of printmakers do, I explored process. So I call them my process prints. They're about printmaking. They're about what you can do with expanding by using different chemicals and different ways of treating the plate. But they don't give you a subject. You just end up with a beautiful print, but no subject. And before this, I had done a series about Vietnam, about different subjects, beautiful women. I did a series. But these prints in the 80s, I put away. I didn't take them out and until about 8 years ago. As I said, cleaning up my print cabinet, and I'm having a Parkinson's moment. You have to bear with me. They call it freezing. The images from the 80s that I mentioned earlier looked finished when I put the scans in various stages on top of those prints. Sometimes I've actually physically woven the prints together. And an idea I picked up from a Vietnamese artist, Dinh Q. Lê, who wove pictures of the war against pictures of Hollywood's depiction of the war. And you saw both at the same time. And I've always been amazed at how he did that. So I thought I'd try it with these images, and it seemed to work. Again, I couldn't tell you why, but it just seemed to work. So I took those 80s prints and for several months played with them. A lot of them I threw away. I kept probably 40 or 50. And then I said, my wife was very encouraging. Every time I bring one down, she would go, "Wow, that's amazing. You're really doing something special." Because sometimes as an artist, you don't know when you're doing your best work. But I'd hope that the Parkinson's diagnosis would lead to a series of work that would be meaningful, not just to me, but to other Parkinson's patients who are fighting the same battles or similar battles. And I've been very happy at the turnout of Parkinson's patients at my exhibits in Maine and New York and New Mexico and Hanoi and Da Nang. A lot of Parkinson's patients have been attracted to the exhibit. But back to the technical part of the images, these larger prints gave me more space to work with. I could increase the size if I wanted to. I could do other things. So I spent a lot of time playing and experimenting. Then I thought, if the few friends that had responded to these had responded so positively, that I put it together as an exhibit. So I took about 25 or 30 of the pieces and made an exhibit. And then I later made an artist's book using about 25 of the prints, which I can show you later. I don't know where I'm going now. I've done a PET scan, which is a little different than an MRI. I'm having some technical problems because the PET scans are done on a PC format, and I use Apple, so we have to get them transferred to Apple. But we'll manage to do that, and then hopefully the new scan will lead to a new series using up more of those 80s prints. So I learned that I knew very little about my brain. I became sort of obsessed with reading. I read half a dozen books about Parkinson's and about the brain. I wanted to have at least a basic neurological understanding of what was going on. And then as far as that goes with my artwork, like I said, they're not anatomically correct, but for me, I just played with them on different faces on different prints. And I was responding, I tried to let my brain unconsciously direct me. And I sort of tried to remove myself as much as I can. The idea of battling with your brain is a crazy idea, because your brain knows everything you're doing. So you can't possibly win a battle. You have to incorporate and somehow use that brain and not let it use you. So I worked on doing that. It's almost like a Zen meditation, but I'm not a Zen person. I like to have my quiet time, and I've done some Zen, but when I'm in my studio, the Parkinson's, I leave it at the door as much as I can. You can't leave the whole thing at the door, but I go to my studio, especially on a bad day. Today's a medium day. On a bad day, I go to my studio, and when I come out of my studio, I feel better. It's almost like a cure, not a cure, but it relieves some of the symptoms. And I walk a lot. I walk 3 to 5 miles a day, and I do boxing, and I do pickleball, and I live life as full as I possibly can. I have a lot of friends that we still have dinner with and go around. You can't let the Parkinson's take over. You have to fight it. And I've been lucky. I mean, some of it's luck, but some of it's taking the positive and staying strong and fighting it. The subject is from my memory, which is my brain, and it's a Vietnamese girl that I had worked with during the war, sitting on a pedestal with a fern. It brings some of the previous work I did about Vietnam into this work, and then that's my brain, I think, hopefully taking over. This one is, I've always been intrigued by architecture. I think if I were born again, I would become an architect. I love good architecture, and this is me and my brain. And again, sort of similar to the Vietnamese girls that I worked with. And this one is one of my favorite prints. I'm not sure it's everybody's favorite, but this is part of the print, and it looked very brain-like to me. So I put myself looking at the brain, trying to figure it out, and pieces of the brain are coming off the brain and out with the real world and life. It's not like I start out thinking that, but as I go through the process of making the piece, physically making it, cutting it, weaving it, then I figure out why I did it. That's 4. Here's an old one. We'll go back to the beginning. It looked like butterflies to me, dragonflies, which Vietnamese are very fond of dragonflies. We have about 1,000 made by Buddhist monks that we have. We gave them away as wedding gifts at our son's wedding. These were the early experiments I did. Just playing with the MRI scan and the selfies that I took. I didn't know where I was going. It took me some time to figure that out. And I still don't know exactly where I'm going. That's part of the fun of being an artist. And of course that's complicated by my Parkinson's, because that will tell me sometimes what I can do and what I can't do, which leads to the panel discussion in Santa Fe where I was having a bad day and I couldn't participate in the panel discussion because my Parkinson's had taken over my brain for the day. So I'm now doing the same thing in my studio, and so far my brain has pretty much let me do what I wanted to do in Santa Fe. But that's part of living with Parkinson's. Some days are good and some days are not so good. Here's what I particularly like. It's pretty subtle about the brain, but it even has the recordings of the information, the technical information of the MRI, which was taken at the VA in West Roxbury. It had my Social Security number on it, and my wife, Jean, said, "You can't do that. You can't have your Social Security number. Somebody will take it and you'll be in big trouble." So I had to remove the Social Security number from all of these. But
And why had you gone to the VA to have the scans done?
my neurologist had recommended that they do a brain scan early on in the diagnosis. And then they did another brain scan, a PET scan, different from an MRI. And they'll use that to compare as my Parkinson's increases, which it will. It's a degenerative disease. They want to see how my brain changes, and that may give them some ideas about how to treat or even how to cure. So I volunteered for a number of different studies. It's the least I can do. The VA gives me a very handsome pension. For my disability, it's 100%. Although I think I produce enough artwork, so they may take away my 100%. Hopefully it's a long time. It's been 10 years since I was diagnosed. My sister was here one day and I was showing her some of these, and she started to laugh and she said, that brain's not in the right position. She was a physical therapist her career. And I said, I don't worry about the anatomy. I'm more concerned with the aesthetic and the gut feeling that the viewer will get, I hope. But the anatomy is very far down the list of priorities. So if the brain's a little out of place, so be it. This is one that brought in the Agent Orange, because my Parkinson's was caused by my exposure to Agent Orange back in the 1960s when I was stationed in Pleiku, South Vietnam then. I didn't know that the Agent Orange had a dioxin in it, but Dow Chemical did, and they still produced it using the excuse that it didn't have dioxin in it, but they later found out it does. So there's a high rate of Parkinson's and a lot of cancers. in veterans who were stationed in Vietnam between 1965, I think, and 1973. I'm one of the lucky ones that I've lasted 10 years, and I'm still doing 90% of what I've always done.